Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So, first of all, I think I have spotted some glitter on my nose, which, just so you know, does not come from any cosmetics, but from my son's Play-Doh. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh, I've got the latest in Lil Camara styles. I am not your ingenue. I actually suggested this as a line to her because I have a lot of times people like to say like, what's it like having your first novel go viral, or like you're so young to have written a novel, and then which is when I have to remind people that I'm in my 30s and like which is very young. It's ironic that I have to say I'm not actually that young when actually I am very young. Young in the scheme of things. And then also to point out that like the Atlas Six was my ninth novel, which every time I pointed that out to anyone who was doing an interview, they didn't make a point to say that. There was sort of I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been listening to Evergreen, the Paris new album, and the song Evergreen is about how basically no one cares unless you're dead or you're 17, and sort of that idea of like, I've talked about this before, this sort of over idealization of youth and the things that you can accomplish as a young person. While that's very exciting to be a successful young person, it also creates this weird sense that you're running out of time, especially as a woman. So anyway, Lil Camara, they good. Let's see, what did I have to talk about? Okay, I'm doing this very much like on the fly because Masters of Death comes out next week, which is crazy. I have waiting for me my next era. This is from Reader Society Shop, which they did the custom One for My Enemy necklaces, and this one is a little death tarot card necklace. So yes, we're transitioning to the immortal era. I also have here this one. I love it. This is, I think, probably my favorite, which is hard to say because there's a lot that I really love in this shop. But this is the Dark Academia necklace, which you probably can't see very clearly, but that's fine because I'm going to take a picture and post it on my Instagram, and it's going to be fantastic. And you're going to be like, oh, Olivia, is this content? And I'm going to be like, I don't know, maybe. Oh, I do, very excitingly. It's August right now. It's August. I am Indigo's author of the month this month, which is so exciting. Basically, that means that for all you Indigo customers, you can get any book that I have written or written for. So I believe it includes the Star Wars, the From a Certain Point of View, 40 stories celebrating 40 years of Return of the Jedi for 25% off, which is really, really exciting. Like, that's so cool. Yeah, it's really cool. I'm really honored. Thank you, Canada. Uh, Sidebar, lots of people asked me to come to Canada, and Indigo did invite me to do an in-person event for Masters of Death, and I really wanted to go, but I couldn't because it is the first week that the Goblin Prince is starting at daycare. Don't get me started. Oh my God. He's only going to be gone part-time. And it's really like, it's partially because he just needs a lot more social interaction. He's turning out to be quite shy, and he's not really comfortable around other kids. And also I've signed a contract, which I will discuss, for many, many more books. And I am going to be physically unable to complete those unless I create some extra hours in the day. So it's a mix of, it's going to be better for him to be in preschool and better for me to have a few more hours to work. Because right now I've just like, for basically the last 2 years, I have very unsustainably been filling every single spare moment with work to the point where I keep telling myself, I'll take a break this time, or I'll take a break when I finish this, and I'll take a break then. And I'm never actually taking any breaks. And I can feel that that's like, generally by the time like the holidays roll around, I'm like, I need a break so badly, I'm gonna collapse. But then like the holidays are their own form of stress, you know? So even if I'm not working, it's like a whole other thing. All of which is to say that I'm trying to create a little bit more stability in my life, but also totally fucking panicking at the idea of my son being like gone for part of the day. I'm gonna miss him so much. I'm gonna start crying. No, I'm not. I'm fine. Okay. What was I pulling up? Oh, I think I was pulling up what I was gonna talk about. Okay. Which wasn't any of this. Oh yeah, so I think I was asked to go to, I believe, Toronto But it was like that same week where I had a bunch of in-person Masters of Death things going on. Next week, you can catch me in New York and LA. And then after that, I have a virtual event on the 22nd with Alix Harrow, which is super exciting. I'm so excited to talk to her about Starling House, which I love. I think a lot of you are going to love it. If you've never experienced Alix Harrow's work before, you're going to fall in love with her writing. And if you already love her, Starling House is like, it's like she's unlocked this sort of combination of what she was so good at in the Fractured Fables, in that very contemporary voice, with the very magical, ethereal voice that she already has established in her standalone novels. Anyway, which Starling House is standalone, but I just mean compared to her Tor.com novellas. Anyway, that's happening. I do have a virtual event with Indigo, which I'm just forgetting. I'm just realizing that I've forgotten when it is. But that's happening, and I will confirm it for you at some point somewhere, probably on my socials. And then also August 26th, I will be in Huntington Beach again. I'm so excited to be back at the Barnes & Noble in Huntington Beach to celebrate the Barnes & Noble exclusive of Masters of Death, which I do not have with me, but which is really cool. It's a different colorway if you were not into this. Although I feel like people who don't like this cover are, you know, understandably unfamiliar with the content of the book. I feel like this cover, which first of all, it's matte, and this is like embossed, which is really cool. Like the product is a very interesting book. Like I can't believe this is a standard edition. It feels like a special edition. And these are pull arts, and there's interior art by Lilith Mora as always, but I don't want to show you because I think we're probably going to do like a social media reveal at some point. You'll get to see it then. But the Barnes & Noble colorway is more of like a, I actually haven't seen it in person, so I'm not going to tell you, but it's because I don't want to get it wrong, but it's a more neutral color scheme. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so those are all the things that are happening. I mean, if you're planning to attend the New York event, so it's Strand Books, August 7th, and then LA is the Last Bookstore, which I'm super excited about, on Wednesday, August 9th. Okay, and also, oh my gosh, and at Strand, I'm talking to Kat Ward, Catriona Ward. She is fantastic. I love her books. I'm constantly selling you on them or trying to sell you on them. My personal favorite is Sundial, and the paperback is super beautiful. I've talked about it before, but Looking Glass Sound is out and I love it. If you're really into like sort of weird toxic interpersonal relationships, which if you like my work, you probably are into that, you'll really like Looking Glass Sound. It has elements of dark academia, not actually, but like that vibe. And it's on this like sort of eerie coastal Maine setting. So if you really want to make A Happy Place by Emily Henry like more traumatic, then read Looking Glass Sound. I'm a really good sell for these things. Okay, so new books announcement. So one of the things that I got to announce recently is that I'm on contract for 3 new books, one of which is January's. It's an anthology, and I keep referring to it as basically my Eras tour, in that it's some of my like iconic cult classic stories, but also some new stories, including this novella that I'm super excited about called Chaos Theory. One of the characters is a total psychopath and the other one is a cat. So there are 2 psychopath characters. But yeah, I'm like really obsessed with it, and it's weird. And I think my editor has notes, which is fine. But anyway, so the collection, January's, is coming out, I think fall 2024, which makes 3 new books for me next year. And then after that will be the Untitled Hollywood Gothic, which if you've been around, I have talked about because I started writing it 2 years ago, and then I put it aside for a while because I wasn't sure if I was going to continue doing young adult. And then as I was revisiting it, I was like, I think there is something interesting here. However, I think it could potentially be aged up. I think this character makes a little bit more sense if she is in her early 20s as opposed to her late teens. But that is a gothic romance. I think tonally that one will be a departure from my usual Olivie stuff. So it will be properly Tor because it has a demon, or does it? Actually, tonally, it's probably quite similar to Starling House by Alix Harrow. I didn't copy her, I swear. And then, so yeah, so there's that. And it also involves sort of, this immigrant family collective they live on. It's fine. I have always wondered, like I've always wanted to read a book about the house full of psychics in the Raven cycle. Like understandably, Maggie Stiefvater doesn't go into it because it's a YA series and we're focusing on Blue, but I've always been very curious about these these psychic women all living together. So I am riffing off that a little bit. And then let's see. And then the third book that if you've been around here, you've definitely heard about before. And if you go back through all these videos, you'll hear excerpts of it, is Stargazing is Necrophilia, which is it's going to release from the Bramble imprint, probably, I think right now it's slated for February 2026. And that is tonally most similar to Alone with You in the Ether. But it is different because it is all being told from the perspective of one character who is in some ways a mashup of Regan and Aldo, because she also struggles with her mental health. I wonder where I get that from. But she is an artist and kind of is wrestling with her perception of herself and her value. It's very much a story about womanhood and the female experience, and in a lot of ways the feeling of having once been a prodigy and not really knowing what comes next, like what comes between being the prodigy and the ingenue and the crone. If other than being a wife or a mother, who are you? So she's in her, I think she's in her late 20s at the beginning of the book, probably her early 30s by the end. And a lot of it's meant to feel speculative in similar ways as Alone with You in the Ether. There isn't technically nothing speculative except that so much of it revolves around the possibility of time travel. And I want you to have the feeling while you're reading Alone with You in the Ether that like Aldo could potentially solve time travel and then it would be a time travel story. We're just not focusing on that right now. But anyway, so Stargazing is Necrophilia is definitely like, it is more of, it's a sad girl book. It's a sad girl book for sure. It definitely was born from a place of me questioning whether my art mattered and whether anyone was going to care about it, whether I was capable of even creating great art. And also this sort of feeling of, that late 20s disillusionment with who are you supposed to be, the sort of loss of your ideal self and the reckoning with your actual self. And of course there is a love story in similar ways to Alone with You in the Ether, where that love story is complicated and not necessarily healthy all the time, and not to the point of toxic, but to the point of, it really is playing with that idea of what kind of love do you accept? What kind of love do you choose? And what, like, how do you come around to accepting your own vulnerabilities and being able to love? These are things I wrestle with all the time. Masters of Death, I said before, is like, it's a weird book because I was playing around while I wrote it. I was experimenting with writing out of order and just kind of engaging whatever mood felt right and then trying to piece it back together into a story that made sense, but that was still true to the sort of labyrinthine thought experiment I was having about what does it mean to exist and what does it mean to be intimate with another person and when is it worth it to be vulnerable. So it's a book about connection, and this book is also about connection, but in like tonally more undressed way, less levity, a little bit more ethereality. I hope that one is going to be a little bit harder for me to get back into that sort of meditative state to write. So we'll see how that goes. I also have another idea that I put on my website, and I think it's what I will be writing this fall. And it is essentially an exploration of feminine craving and ritualized cannibalism. And it is called Girl Dinner. So I wrote down social media ? I have no idea what that means. We already talked about the Masters of Death hardcover and the tour. Oh, yeah. Oh, so one thing I wanted to bring up was just like, what I'm finding very interesting is that I feel like my audience generally, it's pretty varied, but it's also quite generally falls into the late teens, early 20s, age group. There's certainly a lot of readers that fall into that demographic. And I used to write a lot of books that were definitely aimed at that demographic. Like, you know, Sasha and One for My Enemy is like exactly who I picture a lot of my readers being, or Libby from the Atlas series. And I'm finding, you know, as I'm thinking about what do I want to write moving forward, because I have all these ideas, I'm on contract for like a lot of stuff now. Thank you, by the way. I mentioned this in my newsletter, but it's pretty crazy to have this level of stability as an artist. I am so incredibly grateful, and I wouldn't be here if you didn't buy my books. I wouldn't. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who has, you know, talked about my books on social media. Like, this is the kind of thing, this is an endless stream of gratitude. This will always be true, but it's certainly something I'm thinking a lot about now. And so I kind of get this feeling where, like, starting to wonder how authors continue to write in the same age group for long periods of time. Like Sarah Dessen, I don't, did this lullaby just get re-released or something? Because I've been seeing it everywhere, and it's a different cover than the one I had. But anyway, this lullaby was like a huge thing for me. Like, as a teen, that was like my ideal romance. Fucking love Dexter. I'm really hoping that I just read the brief for Funny Story by Emily Henry, which sounds most appealing to me of her concepts so far, because it sounds potentially like the main male character might be Dexter-esque. But anyway, like, how did Sarah Dessen write for the same age group all those books, and they were all so good? Like, how did she continue to do that when she as an artist was aging? Because I am getting to a point where, like, I want to write about the postpartum experience because it's what I'm going through. But at the same time, I know a lot of my readers can't relate to it yet. So, like, how do I do that? And I also want to write for the young women I know that I also relate to, that don't want children, or aren't sure they want children, or even if they do want children, don't want themselves defined by their want of children. Like, it's this very confusing place of, like, I want to write older women, but I don't want to alienate my young female audience. And I want to write mothers, but I also want to write women who choose not to be mothers and what that feels like. And I want to write people who choose, you know, these things that I wrestle with, you know, the identity of myself as a you know, as a woman that is also a wife and a mother. I feel like you see where I'm going here. That's just the trying to define myself, but also trying to write the fact that my definition of myself changes a lot and has changed as I've aged, and there's lots of stories I want to tell is essentially the thing. But yeah, and I just find it very interesting having to decide now how old to make my characters, because there's so many different versions of different stories that I want to tell. Luckily, it probably means that, like, what it probably means in practice is that I will jump around in age group a lot, that it will sometimes be women in their early 20s, sometimes women in their 30s, and you kind of will just have to. I like to think that my books are different enough from each other that you can't necessarily jump in and expect the same thing every time anyway, but I just wanted to share with you that this was something that I was thinking about, that it was like, on the one hand, I do have this sort of young audience that wants to see themselves on the page, but they will get older too, and will they still want to, like, will they still want that, the version of that age that I write for them? It's just this it's very confusing, I think, to be someone who is creating for an audience, because that's what I have to do, because I have to sell books, but also wanting to tell these stories that are also very underrepresented. Older women are hard to find, especially in romance novels. I did appreciate that about Happy Place, which, if you can't tell, I just recently finished, that their ages were very indeterminate. I don't think Emily Henry actually said how old the main character was, and we were just supposed to understand that they had crossed the 30 line. And then I read Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld, which was fantastic. The first half of the book was so funny, because the first half of the book, like, basically takes place over the course of less than a week while they're planning for what is a fake SNL episode. And I thought, this will not hang together if she is not as funny as, like, the SNL concepts that I've read. And it was incredibly funny. It was really, really good. It does have, at the halfway mark, it reaches like a COVID sort of plot. COVID hits, and then there's a more of an epistolary thing, and then a little bit more into the serious emotional place. It has a pretty consistent tone of like amusement. The narrator is amusing, and she's interesting, and she feels unique. She's neurotic in a beautifully weird way. But she's like 38, which was really cool. It's really cool to me to read about women who know their shit, you know, and who aren't having, like, even if they're having career questions of like, what should I do next? They're not questioning, what am I worth? I think that's the real interesting transition. I'm happy that that kind of work is available. I also wonder, what kind of work am I going to write? So yeah, that's just a thing. That's just a thing I've been thinking about. I also read, oh yeah, You Made a Fool of Death with Their Beauty, which that character is 29. So even late 20s, I would say, is like sort of unusual. I feel like there was a point when a lot of the romance novels I was reading were characters in their mid 20s. And yeah, I appreciate this like more broader scope of what's out there and the various things that you feel as a woman in any given time. To me, I've said this before, but when I'm writing, the most important thing to me is voice. And so I will always choose an interesting voice over everything when I'm reading a book, certainly over genre. So yeah, this is just something I've been observing. What is interesting to me about these various voices sometimes is it's sometimes very appealing to read someone who feels like they're still encountering the same fundamental questions about existence, but from a place of more certainty, which I think is great, because that is something that I felt was a gift about turning 30, is this feeling of like, okay, I kind of understand who I am now. I'm less worried that the rejection of others is going to chip away from what I feel about myself. My value is less in like less up in the air. You know, I don't need anyone to tell me what I'm worth anymore. But I continue to have questions about who am I, and what do I do? I did have one question from someone, which is, I really like your characters and was curious as to what your process is or steps you go through to create a character and bring them to life. I find your characters are very detailed in their flaws and tics, very real feeling, and I find that something I struggle with when it comes to characterization, that my characters don't feel real or interesting. I'd really like to create a character with you and see your thought process, because I'm dying. I've said this before. So the character part of writing is what I consider my strength, in that it comes easiest to me. I don't spend a lot of time building a character. And I think people who are drawn to my books are there for the characters, and people who don't like my books are people who just kind of tend to be a little bit more unsympathetic to what the characters are doing or what they're going through. I noticed this especially with I will admit that the Atlas 6 creates what you think is going to be a certain thing, a thing that, let's say, we've seen before. And then the Atlas Paradox feels very different to a lot of people, because that's sort of when they realize, oh, this is really a character study. This is really just about 6 people and their interactions, and they don't necessarily improve as people in the way that readers sometimes think that they should. And I can see, sometimes people tag me in their opinions that the characters are flat or immature, and which I think what that is, to me, my interpretation of what that is I don't like them, I don't agree with them, I don't find them sympathetic, which is fine, which is fair. But, I'm always writing from my understanding of what it means to be human. And I think as a human, I understand a lot of the weaknesses that these characters have, probably because to some extent they're all a variation of my own. Like I once had someone at an event ask me, why did I make Callum drunk in the Atlas Paradox? Which I found to be very amusing phrasing. And I think I stared at her for a long time trying to figure out what she was saying to me, or trying to like work through what she was like actually trying to express there. Because, in my opinion, I didn't make him that way. I built him to be a character who is very you know, he is insecure, and he doesn't acknowledge that aloud. He doesn't say that outright, and you as the audience just have to observe that about him, and observe that what he hates about Libby is extremely true about himself. Like, basically Callum and Libby are just this like weird little mirror standoff where they're looking at each other being like, I hate that, and it's something that they see about themselves, that they believe about themselves but don't want to say because they know they don't like it. And Callum's, you know, I didn't, the initiation ritual, which is something that book 3 talks about, so I'm not going to go into it very much. Like, I also noted that a lot of people were like, nothing happens in the beginning of the book, but something very critical happens, which is that each of these characters are faced with their own personal trauma, and they're watching it from like a front row seat with everyone else around them who was, up until that point, a rival who might have killed them. And, you know, it's just a very charged situation. And for Callum to come away from seeing the ugliest parts of himself on display in front of someone he very clearly has feelings for, it is so damaging to his sense of self that he then begins what is essentially, you could call it a coping mechanism, or you could call it self-harm, and both are true. And you know, to me, that was a very obvious next step for him. Like, that's something that is, he begins the book just completely uninspired. He goes along with this because Atlas like negs him a little bit, and he's like, okay, I'm in, you know, and you know, he's a very aimless person who doesn't know what he wants, who doesn't know what he believes in. And you know, it's, and for him to essentially see the ugliest parts of himself completely on display, just completely laid bare for all these people that he wants to hate but really doesn't. That's the kind of situation in isolation. The other thing about book 2 is you're meant to be like, it's like a what's the word? You know, when you're trapped in a when you're trapped in a confined space, like cabin fever. I don't know. It's meant to have that sense that all these characters are going a little like nuts. Like, they are really, really unraveling because not enough is happening to them, and they're encountered only with each other, and the sort of like buzz of tension is meant to be there tangibly, which I understand feels to the reader like nothing's happening. I get it. All of which is to say, I don't really know how I create characters. I don't know that I have like advice. I know I don't start writing until I hear the character's voice in my head, until I understand like the ways that they use sarcasm and whether they do or don't, and how hard they try to please people. Do they? How much do they lie to themselves? How much do they lie to others? Like, it's very hard for me to tell you how to do that. But, you know, I think that you can't start writing until you understand like not only what is the thing that this person wants most, but what do they most want to avoid? What do they definitely not want to do? And what happens when you put them in that situation? What happens if the thing that they most do not want to do, like Fox Demora, for example, if the thing that he most does not want to do, which is break his you know, cycle of, again, prolonged self-harm, and care about something other than himself, what happens when you do that? And I think that, you know, that inherently involves the question of what are their flaws? What are their flaws? And what specific ways are they going to engage them? And in what ways are their strengths going to save them? But to me, that's a discovery thing. I would never go in writing knowing the answers to all of that. I discover that as I write. I'm very much a pantser. At San Diego Comic-Con, Jacqueline Carey basically, like, I felt like she just reached out and slapped me across the face because someone said, for the pantsers, have you ever felt the need to plot something or something like that? I don't remember the actual question. And then for the plotters, have you ever come across something that you didn't expect? And Jacqueline Carey said, no, that's why we plot. And I felt it like a blow, I'm telling you. That's really wonderful for her. She is an incredible writer. And I told her I could never have written something with the political complexity of the KUSHIEL'S legacy series. It is so complex. It's so clearly plotted, and so intricately plotted that that's not something I would have ever written, because I would have gotten stuck on some like emotional thing, and like it would have been 4 times as long. So all of which is to say, I don't know how to make a character feel real. And but I think a lot of this is subjective. You might be just being a little too hard on yourself. A lot of it comes with practice. Sometimes the ability to build a complex character is something that comes with practice. I would not say, like, my very first fan fictions that I wrote never involved more than 2 characters, because I couldn't build more than that. And my side characters were also very simplistic. They were very archetypal because I didn't know how to build them in subtle ways. And that's something that you can build up as you do it. As you start to learn, like, oh, this little tiny thing that I've given a character says something about them that I don't necessarily have to say outright. It's certain things like in My Mechanical Romance, I was writing what I thought to be a very diverse cast, but I didn't want to do it in a way where I was like pointing to people and being like, this one's Chinese and this one is Mexican. Like, I didn't want that to be the feeling, which is the feeling I sometimes get when I'm reading books, and I didn't want that. And so I would start to sort of shorthand that by like, at lunch, this character is eating kimchi. This character, his parents want him to marry a nice Chinese girl. Like, these sort of like, these things that feel offhanded that are weighted with significance once you learn how to create that sort of significance on the page. But all of this is so subjective. There are tons of people who think that I don't know how to create characters, or that I create bad characters, or whatever. And I don't agree with them, and I don't have to. But I think you might be being a little hard on your work. It's something that maybe you could work with a critique partner on. That's like, after you've written, have someone read and say, does this character feel believable? Do their decisions feel consistent? Does their growth feel like, palpable? Does it feel tangible? In what ways is the reader propelled through the story because they're invested in this character? But that's something, you can troubleshoot that. I am, of course, one type of writer. I am a pantsing discovery writer. I figure things out as I go. So that's always, to me, feels like a perfectly fine way to go about things. If you want to check in with a critique partner more often, that might help you, so that they could point out places where they're like, this doesn't feel realistic, or this doesn't feel real. But all of these characters are basically always going to be variations on you and what you think a person would or wouldn't do. So I do read a lot of psychology books, and philosophy books, just as a sidebar. But yeah, okay. Well, that is all for now. I don't know when I'll be back, but hopefully soon. Oh, some other things that are coming out. So like I said, the From a Certain Point of View is coming out August 29th. It did get bumped up from early September. And then also the In These Hallowed Halls Dark Academia anthology comes out September 12th. And I am so excited about that. I've been reading the stories like every chance I get. I love them so much. You're going to love this collection. It's beautiful also, which of course I didn't bring with me, because why be prepared for something? I better go. So this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next time.